Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Brian, and today I want to talk about Frankenstein. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the novel written more than 200 years ago. Somehow, this book has not only stayed in print for all of these years, but remains as culturally relevant as it was when it was first written. You are, I'm sure, familiar with the story, the creature brought to life by the mad scientist only to be scorned and tossed out by his creator, leading to all kinds of death and destruction. But what you may not be familiar with is how this novel came to be in the first place. The true story of how an 18-year-old girl from Regency England managed to kickstart an entire literary genre using very real scientific theory, all for a simple challenge amongst friends. This is the story of how Mary Shelley created Frankenstein. And it starts with a volcano. The year was 1815, and right here on this island in what is now Indonesia, Mount Tambora erupted. It was, and remains to this day, the largest volcanic eruption in human history. With a force of 33 gigatons of TNT, it was nearly 1,400 times more powerful than Mount St. Helens, over 2 million times more powerful than the first nuclear bomb. It was absolutely devastating to the islands surrounding it and people who occupied them. An unimaginable tragedy, rock, ash, and magma destroying entire villages, laying waste to an entire region. But the damage and destruction didn't end there, as the toxic gases bellowed out of the earth and into the atmosphere, spreading out across the globe. As the sun was blocked, volcanic winter spread throughout the northern hemisphere, lowering the Earth's temperature by a full degree. Crops failed, massive famine, typhus spread throughout Europe. It was a period of darkness, both literally and figuratively. The year following the eruption of Mount Tambora, 1816, would be known as the year without a summer. As storms raged across continents, the sky dark for months at a time. Rivers, lakes, and the ground froze as late as June of that year. And it was during that June of 1816 that our story takes place, in a mansion near Lake Geneva, Switzerland. Known as Villa Diodati, the mansion belonged to Lord Byron. For those of you unfamiliar with the celebrities of the early 19th century, Lord Byron was a Regency-era superstar. He was the Harry Styles of his generation. He was a poet during a time when poetry was the thing. Ladies loved him, and he loved the ladies, arguably a little too much. He was known not only as one of Britain's greatest poets, but as a free thinker, a revolutionary, a folk hero, and also a womanizer, a gambler, a philanderer, and an all-around cad. The man had to flee England earlier that year, never to return due to multiple scandals. He was cheating on his wife with numerous women. He had massive debts built up without any hope of repaying, and there were rumors of an incestuous relationship with his half-sister. Gross. But since he was a famous celebrity, his exile was cushy and relaxing. He toured Europe, staying with fellow celebrities or in one of his many properties across the continent. In June 1816, he found himself in his beautiful Swiss villa near Lake Geneva. He was accompanied by his friend and personal physician, a man named John William Polidori. Polidori, aside from his medical practice, was an aspiring writer who could only dream of reaching Lord Byron's level of fame and renown. They spent their days writing and waning philosophically, as Regency gentlemen were wont to do, and one day during that bleak June of 1816, they opened their doors to some friends who were summering nearby. One was Byron's old friend and colleague from London, Percy Bysshe Shelley. Shelley, too, was a writer. He would never be as big as Lord Byron, but would still be well known with a number of poems and plays published and performed. Also like Lord Byron, Shelley was a political radical and a womanizer with massive debts in England. Politically, he dabbled in anarchy, especially in Ireland, and was a devout atheist who didn't believe in the institution of marriage, instead espousing free love and vegetarianism. Despite his thoughts on the institution of marriage, he was, in fact, married. And yet the woman at his side when he entered the doors of Byron's villa was not his wife, or at least not his current wife. He left his wife and child back home in England and was instead eloping with the daughter of his political and philosophical mentor, William Godwin, who was also an atheist who dabbled in political extremism. Godwin's daughter was Mary, the future Mrs. Mary Shelley, author of the book and subject of our story. Mary had fallen in love with Shelley 2 years earlier when she was only 16 years old, and the then 22-year-old free love, Percy Shelley, was already living apart from his wife and child. Mary and Percy Shelley had run away together, and by the summer of 1816 had already conceived their first child together, who they tragically lost when he was only 10 days old, a loss that Mary would never personally recover from. But during their time gallivanting around Europe and England, Percy Shelley continued to spread his ideas of atheism, anarchy, and free love, which he practiced often with numerous partners. And this includes Mary's own stepsister, Claire Claremont, who was also present at Villa Diodati in June of 1816, not only because of her complicated relationship with her stepsister's married boyfriend, but also because she's one of Lord Byron's many conquests during his days living in London. Once again, while he was married to someone else. This is quite the crew of free-thinking philanderers we've got here. And I tell you all of this not only to understand who these people were, but to highlight just how far outside the social and cultural norms these people liked to live. None of their behavior reflected the norms of the era. Sure, philandering and womanizing have been a staple of arrogant men for as long as there have been arrogant men, but to be doing it so publicly, to be writing about it and publishing it in poetry is just nuts and frankly cruel. Cruel to the women whose lives they were destroying, especially at a time when women had so few rights outside of those granted to them by the men in their lives, their husbands or fathers. And it's not just the philandering, but the atheism as well. Nowadays, if someone says they are an atheist, it's not all that shocking, maybe to some degree. But in 1816, hoo boy, and Mary is not just in love with an atheist and an anti-government radical anarchist. She was raised by one. Her father was a well-known philosopher who was a political radical and an outspoken atheist at a time when it was dangerous to be an outspoken atheist. Mary's mother was similarly an outspoken political thinker and a well-known feminist at a time when it was dangerous to be an outspoken feminist. Though sadly Mary never knew her mother, she had died days after Mary was born due to complications from childbirth. Well, I say complications. The doctor didn't wash his hands. Hand washing wouldn't become standard for almost a century. It was a strange time of scientific advancement in between massive gaps in understanding. The point is, Mary, at only 18 years old, as she stood in the doorway of Villa Diodati, had been raised to think in a way that wasn't typical for her era. She spoke at least 5 different languages, was a student of art, philosophy, politics, literature, history, and science. It's no wonder that she engaged with the men as an equal, a fellow thinker and aspiring writer. Plus, they were all hippy-dippy free love people, so there's that element as well. But let's not dive into it too deeply, or else I will almost certainly get demonetized. Instead, I'd like to talk about the intellectual pursuits of this group of published authors, aspiring writers, and Claire Claremont, Mary's stepsister, who frankly is not going to be a part of this story anymore. She goes on to have Lord Byron's child. He kicks her to the curb, more reality show drama, but otherwise she's not integral to the rest of the story. Now, while this group hunkered down in the Swiss villa, waiting out a particularly bad storm during that year without a summer, they decided to do what anyone would do on a dark and stormy day. They read ghost stories, specifically German ghost stories, which I'm sure were extremely uplifting. As they worked their way through Lord Byron's personal collection of German ghost stories, Byron had an idea that would change literature forever. We will each write a ghost story. That's my impression That's my Lord Byron. That's my Lord Byron. We will each write a ghost story. You can see why he was so popular with the ladies. Anyway, he gave a literary challenge to his guests to see who could come up with the most spooky tale to frighten them all. Byron would kick things off with a story he came up with of an English gentleman who went traveling with his mysterious European friend, emphasis on mysterious. The two would travel to a faraway burial ground, presumably for old-timey sightseeing reasons, but there the mysterious older European would suddenly succumb to a mysterious illness. As he lay there mysteriously dying, he made the Englishman swear to never tell a soul about the manner of the man's death. The Englishman agrees and buries his mysterious friend beneath a mysterious vulture per the man's mysterious wishes. But that's it. That's as far as he got. Byron put pen to paper and simply didn't complete the story, but still decided to publish it for some reason as a fragment. Now, while the published version doesn't have an ending, Byron had intended to have the mysterious European man come back from the dead later in the story, where it would be revealed that he was a vampire. Ooh, spooky. Percy Shelley relied on more truth than fiction, writing a story based on an experience from his early life, a time when he was fascinated with chemistry, science, and, to a degree, torturing his poor sisters. He wouldn't go on to put pen to paper, so what exactly was in his story, we will never know, or at least I couldn't find it. Polidori, Byron's personal physician, his story, which also was never published, we do know, at least to a degree, and that's because the entire story was chronicled by Mary Shelley herself in the foreword she wrote for her revised edition of her novel. She is very kind and loving in her vague description of her future husband's writing, and absolutely brutal in her description of Polidori's story. She says, "Poor Polidori had some terrible idea about a skull-headed lady who was so punished for peeping through a keyhole. What to see? I forget. Something very shocking and wrong, of course. But when she was reduced to a worse condition than the renowned Tom of Coventry, he did not know what to do with her, and was obliged to dispatch her to the tomb of the Capulets, the only place for which she was fitted." AKA, I don't know. He wrote a story about a peeping Tom who saw something weird and then had a cliched ending of some kind. Now, while Claire didn't write anything, and who cares about Claire, Mary didn't write anything either. Perhaps it was a bit of stage fright, the pressure of real authors pushing her to come up with something worthy of their time, but Mary had nothing. She would go the rest of the night and even the coming days trying her best to come up with a ghost story worthy of the halls of Lord Byron. Now, she notes in her foreword that as a child, she engaged in what she liked to call waking dreams. I think we would just call them daydreams. But to Mary, these waking dreams were a deeply personal means of escapism that she kept to herself, preferring to keep her ideas for her writing completely separate and based on a more intentional, perhaps logical approach. But one evening, she had one of her waking dreams, or more appropriately, a waking nightmare so visceral, so terrifying, that she simply couldn't get it out of her head. "I saw, with shut eyes but acute mental vision, I saw the pale student of unhallowed arts, kneeling beside the thing he had put together. I saw the hideous phantasm of a man, stretched out and then, on the working of some powerful machine, show signs of life, and stir with an uneasy, half-vital motion. Frightful must it be, for supremely frightful would be the effect of any human endeavor to mock the stupendous mechanism of the Creator of the world. His success would terrify the artist. He would rush away from his odious handiwork, horror-stricken. He would hope that, left to itself, the slight spark of life which he had communicated would fade, that this thing, which had received such imperfect animation, would subside into dead matter, and he might sleep in the belief that the silence of the grave would quench forever the transient existence of the hideous corpse which he had looked upon as the cradle of life. He sleeps, but he is awakened. He opens his eyes. Behold, the horrid thing stands at his bedside, opening his curtains and looking on him with yellow, watery, and speculative eyes. Now that's pretty good. That was pretty good. That's pretty spooky. Spooky, scary. When she awoke, she had her story. It would take her months to actually start writing it, first as a short story, then as a full novel, which would be published by the end of the following year. But she didn't just come up with a story out of thin air. It wasn't just a random nightmare. She based it on a real scientific theory and set of experiments, as implausible and far-fetched as that may seem. Early that evening, before she had her waking nightmare of the hideous phantasm, she had been sitting with Shelley and Byron as they discussed science by way of philosophy. They were debating the principle of life itself, whether or not the dead could ever be brought back to life. And the reason they were discussing this, as noted by Mary, was because of the recent science of galvanism, which was a branch of science born out of the late 18th century that was part of a broader movement to better understand electricity. Think about Ben Franklin with a kite during a thunderstorm. This coincided with the medical advancements achieved throughout the Age of Enlightenment that moved us towards our modern understanding of human physiology. Galvanism was named after Luigi Galvani, a scientist who accidentally discovered that electricity running through a dissected frog would seemingly reanimate it. A pair of frog's legs, when electrified, would twitch and kick, almost as if the frog was trying to jump right off the table. He theorized that all living things had an electric fluid inside them. He called it animal electricity. This theory was debated by fellow scientist and electricity researcher Alessandro Volta. You may recognize his name as the origin of the word volt, like voltage, the unit of measurement of electric potential. They literally named a measurement of electricity after him. The dude knew about electricity. Also, he invented the battery, discovered methane, and was BFFs with Napoleon. So, a pretty cool dude for the time. But Volta, chemist and electricity expert that he was, disagreed with Galvani. He didn't think there was any internal animal electricity, but instead they were witnessing the electricity randomly coursing through the frog's legs as it jumped from one metal to another. In fact, they were both kind of right and both kind of wrong. It was the electricity jumping through the frog from metal to metal, but also living creatures do use electrical impulses to engage their muscles. We may not be able to create electricity as human beings like an eel or a jellyfish, but everything from our thoughts to our movements involve some degree of electricity. So kind of galvanism, kind of got that right. There's no like electric fluid coursing through our veins. But despite their disagreements, Volta himself would coin the term galvanism after his colleague to refer to the science of electricity created by chemical reaction. Now, most scientists of the era would side with Volta, which makes sense because Volta was more accurate. But Galvani's nephew, Giovanni Aldini, would take it to a much higher, much more horrific level. He believed so much in his uncle's theories that he truly believed, that with the right application of electricity, he could reanimate dead tissue. He could bring the dead back to life. He would test these theories publicly. He traveled Europe, gathering huge crowds in medical colleges and theaters, all to demonstrate his electrical experiments on the bodies of various animals, oxen, sheep, dogs, and even people. He would use Volta's battery, known as a voltaic pile, to run electricity through different body parts. He would make limbs move, eyes open, and could even cause the mouth to open and shut as if it was trying to speak. It was alarming for those who saw it, but these grotesque spectacles were seen as little more than that by the medical community at large. They saw it for what it was: random spasms caused by the input of electric current, not life returning to the dead. But you can imagine how sensational it must have been in the news and society at large. While the experts may not have been convinced that it was possible to reanimate dead tissue, it was without question an exciting and alarming thought for anyone who heard of Aldini and his experiments on the dead. And this was a very real fear. Fear not only of what kind of monster would return from the dead, but a fear of what it means to play God. It's what Mary says in her description. To cast off the Creator is to play God. This is where Mary Shelley's entire lifetime of philosophy, science, and even atheism come crashing together, bucking the century and a half of optimism surrounding scientific advancement. Mary saw danger in unquestioning, unrelenting pursuit of knowledge. She saw that creation and the pursuit of it had the potential to destroy not only its creator, but the world in which it was created. And that is why I think the novel persists to this day, questioning scientific advancement, not asking whether or not something can be done, but whether or not it should be done. The danger of knowledge and its pursuit is something we still face today, just as they did then. In fact, it's a challenge we have always faced as a society. Mary knew this, and she put it right in the title. Not Frankenstein, that's just the guy's name, but the full original title, which was Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus, a reference to the Greek myth of Prometheus, the titan who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humans, a gift he was punished for, condemned by Zeus to spend eternity bound to a rock, an eagle devouring his liver every day only to have it grow back to be devoured again tomorrow. Prometheus gave the gift of knowledge to humanity and was condemned for it. It destroyed him. And that is the story of Frankenstein, and would be a recurring theme throughout science fiction. In fact, I quoted one just a second ago. Did you catch it? Not asking whether or not something can be done, but whether or not it should be done.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could that they didn't stop to think if they should.
Jurassic Park is the tale of a creator bringing back dead tissue with modern science, only to see his creation become a destroyer. And much like the original book, the creature is misunderstood. Countless science fiction stories have been modeled after Frankenstein, which in itself would have kept the story alive. But real life has mirrored it as well. There's another man that's been referred to as a modern Prometheus. You probably saw the movie about him, perhaps even the same day you saw Ken do his job of Beach.
Yeah, because actually my job, it's just Beach.
Right. And what a good job you do at Beach.
American Prometheus, The Triumph and Tragedy of J. Robert Oppenheimer was the title of the book Nolan's film was adapted from. He, like Frankenstein, pursued splitting the atom out of his own need to discover the knowledge. And he too watched as his creation destroyed the world around him. And in a parallel that I don't think even Mary Shelley could have predicted, as she wrote her story beneath the shadow of a volcanic winter, that one day there would be a real-life avatar of her character whose creation could bathe the world in a similar darkness, an atomic winter. Victor Frankenstein, J. Robert Oppenheimer, John Hammond, these are men so focused on their own ambitions that they don't realize the cost of their pursuit until it is too late. These days, if you want to find powerful men disregarding the warnings and pushing forward their innovations, you don't need to look any further than artificial intelligence. AI is not the creation of life, at least not yet. But every day there are powerful men working towards a full artificial general intelligence. They genuinely look to breathe life into the machine. What will happen when the machines can think for themselves? Will they help humans, destroy humans? The fact is, we just don't know. Now, I would argue we aren't as close to AGI as some might want to believe, but we are certainly much closer to it than Galvani was to reanimating the dead frog. Perhaps some of these men could use the lessons that Mary Shelley wrote into her book 2 centuries ago. She might suggest to them a bit more caution when playing God. And to me, that is perhaps what is most impressive about this whole story, and why I think the story of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein will stay relevant for centuries to come. Not only did she have an understanding of the power and the dangers of scientific advancement at a time that seems so far away from the world we live in now, but she also had a deep understanding of what it means to be a human, and that is timeless. Oh, and here's a bonus fact for you. A little treat for sticking around to the end. You remember poor Polidori, Byron's personal physician, who had that forgettable ghost story? Well, a little while later, he would ask his friend Lord Byron if he could take a crack at finishing the fragmented story. You know, Byron's story about the mysterious European man. Byron obliged, and Polidori took the fragment and finished it, but not without a few adjustments. Specifically, he changed the mysterious older European man, and as a joke, he changed it into a parody of Byron himself, a self-centered, elegant womanizer, a gambler, and a sinner who was distant from others, and yet they were nevertheless captivated by him. A gentleman who carried himself nobly, but was in fact a danger to anyone who acquainted with him. He would, as Byron had originally intended, come back from the dead in the latter half of the story, only to seduce, marry, and kill the protagonist's sister by sucking her blood. The protagonist, having sworn to not tell anyone the nature of his companion's death, had to helplessly watch his sister fall into the villain's trap. Polidori would call this story the vampire, a reimagining of the creature from folklore as a charming psychopath who would seduce others to their doom. Almost a century later, another author would be inspired by this short story to write a longer one, Dracula by Bram Stoker. Isn't that neat? Pretty much every modern version of a vampire is essentially a satire of a famous romantic poet, which kind of makes a ton of sense. It's how they dress, it's how they carry themselves, and especially when they say things like, "Listen to them, the children of the night, what music they make," or, "You better hold on tight, Spider Monkey." I don't know why I give him the accent. All right, but anyway, that's it. That's all I got for you. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, peace.